left on a satire post about microtransactions in someone's D&D game. This reminds me of an a-hole I met in Adventurers League. I was playing a level 14 barbarian. It took me a year to get him to this point. I had decent health and like 18 armor class. The party has an encounter against 3 elite guardsmen. It took them 5 rounds to kill me. Somehow, they kept rolling 19s and 20s without fail. I was about to roll my death saves when the DM pipes up. The Dungeon Master said, "If you don't want your character to die, I could forget the last hit for $20. I was appalled by this. I scolded him for trying to extort me like we're playing an arcade game. I ended up reporting him to the organization/owner of the shop, and the shop owner didn't see a problem. Amateur extortionists and game store owning enablers. What a match made in heaven. To be frank, I wouldn't blame this guy for abandoning this game and completely abandoning the store as well. No one likes getting fleeced over a frickin' board game." So I've been watching an ungodly amount of Crispy's Tavern videos, thank you by the way, and finally decided to share my own story here. Also, English is not my first language, so beware of lots of mistakes. Myself as a Dungeon Master and my 3 players were several months into my homebrew campaign when one of my players asked if their friend could join us. Since we aren't a big group, my answer was yes. Now, I'm not a really strict DM. If you have an idea of what you want to play, I usually won't put any restrictions. Forgotten god who lost their powers and is now gathering influence to return them? Okay, I'll try and make it work. Haunted cleric of a heretic religion who would be executed on the spot if anybody finds out? Alright, let's discuss it with the other players first, but I think I can manage it. However, we've already had 2 players, Aberrant Mind Sorcerer and Revised Great Old One Warlock, who functioned as party faces with lots of telepathic shenanigans. Both had the actor feat, plus disguise self and mask of many faces, all the good stuff, and the friend wanted to play an eloquence bard with actor and telepathic feats. I've talked to my players, and together, we've decided that it would be difficult for me to give all these players, all 3 of them, enough moments to shine, since, over the course of our campaign, it was leading to more exploration and less social encounters for plot reasons. So I asked if my friend could come up with another character idea apart from the bard. His first reaction was fine. He agreed with my reasonings and created a rogue. I've introduced his character, blah 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 blah, the campaign continued. A month has passed, the characters have leveled up, and my friend wants to multi-class into Bard. As gently as I could, I reminded him that if he wants to proceed with his initial plan, I will, in fact, notice it. This time, his reaction was not as gracious as his previous one. He tried to guilt-trip me into allowing him to do what he wants, as any normal Dungeon Master would, saying that I'm too restrictive, and I'm railroading his character, and it's not for me to decide what he does with his character. Our initial conversation? It didn't matter, apparently since I was wrong in the first place. To be honest, I lost my cool a little. I asked why he even plays in my campaign if I'm such a bad Dungeon Master, and my requests are unreasonable and wrong. Long story short, he left. Another player joined us sometime after and even asked what role our group needed. So now we have a ranger. Also, Laser Llama's ranger rework is splendid, can't recommend it enough. But anyway, all is good, but sometimes I still have doubts. Maybe I should have let the friend play as bard, but also maybe not. I think in some parties this is all good. Some parties love it when everybody is playing a similar type character, but a lot of D&D groups aren't like that. Number 1, it's usually not very optimal to stack one player character type in the entire party, but also a lot of groups don't find it very fun. A lot of us like the variety that Dungeons & Dragons and many TTRPGs offer, where you can have so many different types of characters. Also, I think most importantly, this wasn't a unilateral decision that you made alone. You also had the rest of the party backing you up. This person was going against the grain. They wanted it to be one way, but it was the other way. And if they can't handle that and they get upset about that, well, that's on them, not on you. I'm really lacking in one of the most important D&D skills. I can't describe anything. Like seriously, my players are completely lost when they enter a new spot, and I don't just want to show them the battle map early. Spoilers, you know? I wish there was some way to give them a cinematic preview. Thank God for CzePeku scenes. This video is sponsored by CzePeku, back again to show you guys why they are the #1 RPG creator on all of Patreon. I have spoken at length of how beautiful CzePeku's maps are and how affordable they are, with you being able to start off at just the $1 tier and get the base variants for every map they make and every map they will make. But CzePeku are back here to tell you guys about another project, CzePeku Scenes. One of the most common requests of their over 20,000 patrons is to make alternate views of their maps, and that's what this project is for. They have painted beautiful cinematic scenes to go along with the battle maps that you show your players. It'll help your players understand what you're describing and give them something more to look at than just some blank screen on your virtual tabletop. And by the way, you go up to the $5 tier, you get the animated versions of these scenes. And it should go without saying, but these shouldn't just be used for D&D. Come on, are you seeing these scenes? They're just gorgeous on their own. I'm probably just going to use them as wallpapers because they're so nice. If you are interested in the incredible work from CzePeku, and frankly, why wouldn't you be, then both of their Patreons, CzePeku Maps and CzePeku Scenes, are linked down in the description and down the pinned comment. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. Thank you so much to CzePeku for sponsoring this segment of today's video. And without further ado, I'm going to turn back into an animated rat so that we can get back to the video. Howdy. I don't know what that was. I'm submitting my story not as a horror story, but more as a cautionary tale. I applied to a game on Roll20 as one does. The blurb about the game was gigantic, and the application was very particular with questions about your character's specific personalities and mannerisms, etc. So I figured probably roleplay heavy. The setup was about a lost island appearing off the Sword Coast after many centuries. I eventually forgot about it, and several months later, I got a random invite in my Roll20 for the game and a message with a Discord link, and I had no recollection of what game it would be for, and the starting time was 5 minutes ago. What ensued was me hopping into a Discord with 6 other people and a cacophony of talking about character creation, banter, etc. The Dungeon Master gave me the quick rundown of the game, and I told him that I don't remember what I submitted, and he just said, make something up. Ultimately, we did rolled stats and started at level 2, and I made a Tiefling Light Cleric. We also had a Bardlock, a Wizard, a Fighter, and a Sorcerer. Despite all the craziness of the first session, it was pretty hype, and we seemed to have clicked. Long story short, we were shipwrecked onto an island we were sailing to after being attacked by a giant eldritch crab thing, and whited out? Dang it, Crick Crab, what are we doing this time?
Hello everybody, Crick Crab.
Anyway, we had a few NPC survivors and a colony of sentient rats who were also surviving. Lots of role-playing. We learned that another NPC had made it but went to a nearby swamp and hadn't come back. End of session. During the week, random people kept popping into the server and popping out, or the Dungeon Master was just asking them to leave. Next week, we pick it up, and he says he kicked Sorcerer for being smarter than him, and that made him feel like a threat, like he would ruin the game for sure. Then told us how everybody already had left the game once because he flipped his crap and scared them off, and all these random people was because he sent an invite to everyone that applied to his game that first night we played. So like 35 plus people. We picked up one of those poor souls who made an artificer who didn't even last his first session because he needed to leave early, and the DM quote-unquote talked to him about it the next day, which also ended his career with us. Now, to speedrun the game, we saw Godzilla. We hid from Godzilla. We fought some weird Slenderman elves. 2 of us got petrified for touching the ground during combat until Godzilla came and bailed us out and brought us to a village where we got a 45-minute exposition dump from a green dragon trapped under the village, which included, but not limited to, time travel. Apparently we went to the future. There was a world-ending disaster, talking gators with cowboy hats, dinosaurs, futuristic technology, a weird sex cult, and the rats domesticated flying serpents and started a mail service. This all happened in a day. So, this was very overwhelming, both in and out of character. I'm just a hard-working cleric, trying to spread the good word. every session afterward was the same. We go to a place, we sit and watch a cutscene with just so much pop culture stuff. We get into combat, some NPCs bail us out, we move a square on the map, we have some random pointless encounters with us either gathering magic items or an OP non-player character ally. Lots of what the heck are we doing now kind of moments. This world is just very overwhelming and we have no direction or even just reason to explore it. We got random fetch quests from every NPC we looked at, and they're all resolved a square or two later. Insert random robo-beholder that talks like Winston Churchill right here. Session 4, we get vague notes of what happened to those Slenderman elves, and we find the sword of an archangel named Michael from the Bible. His name was even etched into it. Like, seriously, what the heck is this world? The DM calls me and Wizard out in general chat for not role-playing enough, and I talked it out with him in general chat about how I'm not engaging in this world because it's overwhelming and doesn't make sense half the time, and others chime in. Also that me and Wizard are both playing more stoic characters and don't really need to engage with everything thrown at us to some grand standard. He pretty much says, yeah, that's fine, and thanks for our feedback. Also, we both kind of led that session because everyone else was being silent and the super talkative guy was out that night. So, I don't know, was he mixing us up with someone else?
You haven't been role-playing. Shape up, or I might need to kick you out of the group.
Dude, how can you lecture me about not role-playing enough? I have literally been role-playing this whole time. Are you on drugs?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I mean I've been snorting this whole time.
How?
How else do you think I come up with everything?
Talking gators with cowboy hats, dinosaurs, futuristic technology, a weird sex cult, and the rats domesticated flying serpents and started a mail service.
That checks out, actually. He then DMs me and proceeds to talk to me about all the crap we just talked about out in the open, and it pretty much is the same, why aren't you engaging in my world? Or, why aren't you having fun? After a while, it just felt like talking to a needy, insecure ex. He proceeds to ask for feedback in the Discord every day after that, in between dropping more loads of exposition and lore on top of the cutscenes he locks us into, and surveys, daily surveys about his game, like we're a paid focus group. Okay, so someone complains about us not being level 3 yet, and I mentioned that it probably doesn't help that we don't ever finish any combats and just get bailed out on round 2 of every combat every time we try to fight something. He says, oh yeah, guess I gotta stop doing that. Also, you guys don't get experience for combat, you get level ups after exploring some squares on the map. What the heck? Nobody's impressed with this because it wasn't mentioned in any way beforehand. I missed the next session because life got in the way. I hear later that the wizard died to a giant man-eating plant outright. No roll to hit, no save. He just died. I ask him about it and he says, yeah, probably should have been a save or a way for you guys to get help or something, I guess. He messages about missing the session with only an hour's notice and says no big deal. Then goes on again about me engaging more in the world and role-playing more, and then says if I don't role-play more, he might have to kick me. I don't reply to him for 3 days because I was just like, what? We're not even playing this week, bro. This guy's just a very insecure ex. Like, no, bro. I'm done with this. Good luck. I still think he's mixing me up with someone else and maybe killed the wizard as punishment for him not role-playing hard enough either. When your gut says dip, you should dip. There is nothing that annoys me more than somebody who says, hey, criticism is welcome, please let me know what you need, and then when you give them criticism and let them know what you need, they just ignore everything and don't factor it into future behavior at all. Oh, also side note, it's great to ask your party for feedback, but don't harass your party for feedback. A simple survey after each session, like maybe that's good, but every single day, that's a bit much. Man, I haven't even talked about the insanity of this person's world. It's a lot. And if you want that kind of insanity, then great. But a lot of groups aren't going to vibe with that. This is why Session 0 is so important. All of this is just dropped on the group without much escalation, without much proper setup. And it just feels ridiculous. The worst part is, the group isn't even participating in the insanity. Insanity is fun for players when they get to be a part of it. But here, they're just watching everything happen. And how are you supposed to have fun with something like this if you're just an observer to the DM's glorified drug trip of a game? I am the Dungeon Master for my local game store. I used to work there, and it's my usual place for running games. It's the usual case of not enough Dungeon Masters for the players, so in between my in-store campaigns, I try to run one-shots for the holidays. And on certain occasions, I did a whole month of Pride-themed one-shots. Halloween ones, and my favorite ones, the Christmas one-shots. This story in particular is about a Christmas one-shot run for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'll keep the premise vague. It was advertised as beginner-friendly for up to 4 players starting at level 3. Players could bring their own characters or pick from the pre-made sheets I had made in case they were new or just didn't know how to make a new character. Due to my work schedule, I could only run this one shot twice before Christmas, so I had 2 different groups run this game. The premise was the players worked for St. Nicholas, responsible for spreading festive cheer for the winter festival. I tried to keep the specific holiday vague so it could fit in a fantasy setting. The players would wake up in a tower, trapped, being antagonized by the voice of Caspersz. He has kidnapped them and is trying to test if they're naughty or nice. The goal was to climb up the tower, do the various puzzles, and end the session with a boss fight with Caspersz. Easy enough. The first group who played, they were great. They'd all planned to make thematic, Christmas-themed characters, and it went really well. I had fun with it, despite how absurd some of their battle tactics were. Summoning the sleigh with all the reindeer to do a hit-and-run on Caspersz was not something I ever would have predicted. The second group seemed fine at first. 3 of them had their own characters, and 1 of them used the pre-made warlock that I had. None of them had a backstory like the previous group did, but this is fine. It's a one-shot after all, and it's mainly about doing the puzzles and getting a funky fight at the end. As far as I knew, Warlock did have Dungeons & Dragons experience previously, but just didn't make a character, which was fine. They took a very backseat approach, letting the rest of the party trigger all the traps, mess around with the puzzles, and just kind of followed after them without really offering any sort of solutions. I found it odd, but I did just put it down to maybe they just didn't get the gimmick of the puzzles or want to let the other players shine. I just didn't have a good read on whether this person was enjoying themselves. They got to the roof. Caspersz was there gloating that they will never escape his tower. The warlock interrupts Caspersz's monologue to shout out, "Father, I have finally found you. I have come to join your side. I have gained all the intel you need from being undercover." Everyone was kind of stunned into silence by that. The pre-made sheets had no backstory hook, by the way. They were simple and for new players as to not to overcomplicate things. This person didn't even place hints or drop off any clues during the session to lead up to this. I kind of laughed and said, or are you saying this to like throw him off? But Warlock was dead serious. No, Caspersz is my dad. I got myself caught on purpose so I could reunite with him. I mean, that's one way to solve all your D&D conflicts.
Shadow consumes Orthax's body as he shifts into his true form. I cry out, "Wait, father!" What? Orthax is my dad. I'm his long-lost daughter from before he was turned into a vampire. Look, dude, I'm not an idiot, alright? You can't just add stuff into your backstory. I love integrating in player backstories, but you actually need to, tell me first so I can integrate it in the first place, alright? Look, we can deal with this later. Let's just move on, okay? Okay. Anyway, as Orthax shifts into his true form as a Quetzalcoatl, he soars towards the rooftops. You're going to need some other way to catch him. Oh, I'm going to use my kangaroo jumping abilities to just leap on top of the building after him. A kangaroo? Yeah, my mother was a kangaroo. Your mother was a kangaroo? How is that even possible? Oh, well, it's actually quite simple. Please don't answer that. Look, if you had came to me with this earlier, then maybe we could have handled this. But you did not come to me, and therefore, there's nothing we can do. Well, it's not my fault that Orthax came for my kangaroo mother.
At this point, there's 30 minutes before I need to wrap up the session. I can't exactly work with this sudden emotional baggage for my light-hearted Christmas one-shot, so Caspersz just opts to attack the warlock first and frees her in ice. The fight continues. They beat Caspersz. He vanishes into the night like a classic baddie bad guy. Then St. Nicholas arrives to give the party presents, but the warlock is miffed that Caspersz didn't acknowledge his sudden long-lost child. I pointed out after the game that if they wanted to go with that, maybe as a small plot point, they could have messaged me or spoke to me beforehand to discuss it, mainly so I was a bit more prepared to deal with that, but they kind of just shrugged it off. Still unaware of why they decided to chuck that in there, Caspersz wasn't ready to deal with the warlock with daddy issues. TLDR, player info dumps that Caspersz is her character's father out of nowhere in a one-shot and does psychic damage to me, the Dungeon Master. I mean, I already joked about the main premise of this story in a skit, at least I hope so. So you should get the gist of why this doesn't work. Look, I like it when a player backstory affects the trajectory of the story. However, I want to know about it, or at least I want the player to try and make me aware of it before anything happens. It is not okay for you to drop random details like this, plot-changing details like this, without any sort of warning. Your DM might forget, by the way, it is totally possible, but you need to put your best foot forward and try your best to make them aware of what matters in your backstory, to make them aware that you have a backstory in the first place. It sucks because backstories are such a cool part of the character creation process, and so often I either see them not be utilized that much by players, or utilized as a bludgeoning tool to get what the player wants, or worse, used by the Dungeon Master as a bludgeoning tool to get what they want. Use backstories right. Use them to build up the game, not just for yourself, but for everyone at the table. And try your best to make everyone aware of it, otherwise you might end up with Caspersz having a very strange lost child. Since getting back into Dungeons & Dragons in 2021, I have done Lost Mines of Phandelver twice. So, when looking for new groups, I tend to skip doing that one because it's a little old hat for me. However, while looking on Roll20 that day, I found someone who was running a twist on Lost Mines of Phandelver, where the player characters are members of the Cragmaw Goblins, looking to claim the power of the Forge of Spells for themselves. The game was pitched as a chance to be a little goblin chaos gremlin that was interesting enough for me to apply. I got in, rolled up a Hexblade, which I had never played before, and was cautiously optimistic. Game time came, and things immediately took a bad turn. While there were other players, the main people in this tale are me, Warlock with a cool weapon, Bard, buckle up kids, Artificer, Bard's husband, and Dungeon Master, just a fellow victim in all this. So we're starting with character introductions, and when it's Bard's turn, the first words out of her mouth, and I quote were, "I just want to seduce everyone." I'd heard about this type of player before, but always found them so absurd it was a little hard to believe that people would actually act like that. Well, now it's been dropped into my lap. I never managed to contract the vid, but I'd failed to avoid this gaming absurdity. I mentally groaned and just hoped this would not be too painful. That hope was quickly dashed as Bard suddenly got into an argument with one of her kids, and despite the Dungeon Master and the other members of the party asking, she would just not turn off her mic. Oh, and one of those people was Artificer, who I will remind you was Bard's husband. And here we come to another one of Bard's problem traits. She would not mute her mic when dealing with her kids, so we had to constantly listen to her argue with her oldest kid, who I would guess is around 7, and the crying and babbling of her youngest kid, who I would guess is around 2 or 3. Not a session would go by without Bard having some drama with her kids and a group of strangers on 3 different continents having front row friggin' seats to it. Artificer, her husband, would try telling her to mute the mic, but that would only happen after at least a few minutes of us having to listen to screaming kids. Anyway, back to the horror session 1. We eventually got started, and the Dungeon Master explained our goblin tribe has Sildur Hallwinter? Sildur Hallwinter, we'll go with that. Anyway, we have that person prisoner. Bard jumped in and said that she wanted to bring him some food, and the Dungeon Master basically went, okay, sure, you bring him some food. If you know Horny Bard horror stories, you know what comes next. Yup, the Bard wanted to seduce Sildur. With audible horror in his voice, the Dungeon Master had another goblin interrupt and tell Bard that she has a mission and to go meet the rest of the party. I breathed a mental sigh of relief because I did not sign up for some reverse Goblin Slayer game. If you know, you know. If you don't Google it. Don't gotta tell me twice. At this point, Bard went, and I quote, "Did I boom chicka wow wow with him?" The Dungeon Master responded, "No, he didn't understand what you were trying to do, possibly as a way to give Bard a hint, to knock it off. Surprise. It didn't work." We went off on a mission to find some missing goblins. In the nearby forest, we spotted an elderly goblin being chased by some giant birds and moved to intercept. I'll spare you a long combat story, but it was quickly apparent that Bard was totally new to D&D and had no real idea of how to play. That's fine. We're all new at some point. However, despite help from the rest of the party and her husband, Bard simply never learned how to play her class. Even by session 6, she didn't understand how to use spells, and she didn't even understand that she couldn't attack enemies that were several rooms away from her. Anyway, we saved the elderly goblin, and Bard started putting the moves on him. I was pretty creeped out at this point. I reminded Bard that we had a mission, and the party couldn't just camp for the night, as we just left our base, simply because she'd blown off all her spells in the fight with the birds. When even Artificer took my side, Bard caved, and we got on with the mission. After the session, I immediately texted the Dungeon Master and said, "I gotta be upfront. I can't deal with a bard trying to seduce everyone in sight." He promised to have a word with her, and, to both their credit, Bard toned it down in the next session. There, her antics were just throwing... Touch toning it down? The Dungeon Master was clearly irritated, and all she got from him was basically, "Yeah, I mean, you're a hero of the tribe now. If you want to do that, there are others who will join in to get on your good side. I'll spare you a lot of nonsense, but keep in mind that screaming kids and not learning about how to play their class was a constant background to everything else." Anyway, at one point, we were talking to an NPC, and I managed to roll well enough that she started to share information with us. Bard suddenly decided to hit the NPC with a vicious mockery because I don't like having another girl around. I barely stopped myself from just losing it right there, but we managed to smooth things over, and this NPC agreed to help us, and would go on to be a great asset. Bard insisted on, and succeeded in, stealing from her before leaving though. Hop forward to our big dungeon crawl, and Bard was trying to navigate Roll20 from her phone in the room where her toddler was sleeping. A toddler who, unsurprisingly, woke up and started crying because of having her nap time interrupted. This all led to both Artificer and Bard taking forever on their turns because they were both trying to play on their phones and deal with their kids. At one point, Bard kept wanting to attack enemies several rooms away from where she was, and no amount of explanation as to why she couldn't would make her understand. And when she was off dealing with her kids again, the Dungeon Master grumbled, "She just doesn't know what's going on." I'm pretty sure that was the final straw for the DM. A few minutes later, we got a message from Bard that she was retiring her character. She later clarified that she enjoyed the game, but was going to have to drop out. I'm pretty sure the DM just straight up kicked her out mid-dungeon, but I can't swear to it. Anyway, since Bard left, the game was going well. Artificer is still here and is honestly a cool guy who really pulls his weight in the group. And in complete fairness to Bard, when we were all just chatting, she was really a nice person. Just, as the story shows, not the best at reading the room or Dungeons & Dragons. So there it is, my Horny Bard story. It certainly could have been worse, but it's not something I want to repeat anytime soon. Thanks for reading. Man, the Horny Bard player took things to the next level in ways that I didn't expect. I would have guessed the story would be about something creepy or disturbing, but instead, we got a story about somebody who just doesn't really know how to manage their kids. And look, I am a helpless ace. I have no idea how to manage kids. I don't plan to be a parent for a reason, so I'm not here to judge. However, outside looking in perspective, flawed perspective, you should probably focus on your kids before you focus on your game. Just my opinion on the matter. Of course, everyone needs breaks, but you can't just leave your kids to dry because they'll complain about it, like, loudly. Like, very loudly. Also, yeah, Horny Bard stuff when people don't consent to it, not good. This Dungeon Master was clearly uncomfortable, and you should not try to push that kind of content if the Dungeon Master or the party don't want it. It should go without saying, but I mean, come on, guys. You've seen the show. At the end of the day, Dungeons & Dragons is not for everyone, and not everyone is for Dungeons & Dragons. I'm glad that in the end, it somewhat worked out for all these people. Not as crazy as it could have been. I guess I'm sparing you from the insanity of last Friday. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Tabletop Tavern Tips series, where we give advice for both DMs and players, old and new. It's linked in the cards. And while you're up there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down into the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment not the worst bard, to let me know you made it to the end of the episode. Hey, by the way, if you have your own horror stories, then you can send them directly to us. There's an email down in the description down below. Send your stories our way for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. But hey, even if you don't have any stories, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.
I don't even know if that was a frame. Just like.